Clara was sipping her coffee, the morning sunlight spilling over the cafe's wooden table when she first noticed the little girl. At first, she thought nothing of it. A child playing in the park. A normal sight on a quiet Saturday morning. But something about the girl's eyes caught her attention. The child, no more than 5, was standing still on the sidewalk across the street, staring directly at Clara. Clara glanced down at her phone, half wondering if it was a trick of the light. But when she looked up again, the girl was still there. Her big, brown eyes locked on Clara's face with an intensity that made Clara's skin prickle. She felt a sudden, unexplainable urge to cross the street and approach the girl. But she held back. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, taking a seat across from her. His casual smile always a comforting presence. He hadn't noticed the little girl yet, his attention still on his phone. "Yeah," Clara replied, but her gaze lingered on the child across the street. "There's this little girl, she keeps staring at me." Ethan glanced up, following her gaze, but by the time he looked, the girl had vanished behind a corner. "Probably just curious," he said, shrugging. "Kids do that all the time." Clara nodded, but the sensation lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. Something in the child's eyes told her that this wasn't a simple case of curiosity. The next day, Clara was walking home from the market when she saw the same little girl again. This time, she was standing by a tree near the park, her small hands gripping the trunk. Her eyes followed Clara as she approached, and Clara could feel the weight of her stare even from a distance. Clara's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just curiosity, there was something deeper, something unspoken, in the way the girl looked at her. A silent plea. "Hey there," Clara said, her voice soft and inviting. "Are you lost?" The little girl didn't answer, but she stepped closer, her gaze never wavering. Clara crouched down to the girl's level, trying to make herself seem less intimidating. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The girl hesitated for a moment before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "Lena." "Lena," Clara repeated, smiling. "Where are your parents?" "Lena? Are you waiting for them?" Lena's gaze flickered for just a moment, and Clara noticed a fleeting expression of sadness, almost like fear, before she quickly looked away. Clara's heart tightened in her chest. There was something terribly wrong. This wasn't just a child waiting for her parents. This was a child who needed help, desperately. "Where do you live, Lena?" Clara asked softly, her voice gentle but insistent. Lena remained silent, her small face unreadable. For a moment, Clara felt as though the world had stopped, and the only thing that mattered was this little girl standing before her, with a world of secrets hidden in her silence. "I can help you, Lena," Clara said, reaching out to gently touch her hand. "You don't have to be alone." Lena looked up at her, her wide eyes filled with an emotion Clara couldn't quite place. The girl nodded, as if making a decision, and for the first time, she took a small step closer to Clara. Clara's heart skipped again, this time in a rush of determination. She wouldn't let this child slip away. She didn't know why, but she knew that whatever it was important, and she would do whatever it took to help Lena, even if it meant uncovering something that would change their lives forever. The following day, Ethan and Clara found themselves walking through the park, searching for Lena. Clara had tried to push the uneasy feeling in her chest aside, but the memory of the girl's haunted eyes stayed with her, gnawing at her thoughts. Ethan, as calm and rational as always, was more skeptical, but he understood Clara's concern. "Do you think we should just go to the authorities?" Ethan asked, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket as they strolled along the path. Clara shook her head, glancing around the park. "I don't know, Ethan. I feel like she needs someone to help her first. Before we do anything. She's just a little girl, there's something not right. I can't explain it." Ethan sighed, his eyes scanning the park as well. "I get it, Clara, but we can't make assumptions. Maybe she's fine, maybe she's not." Clara interrupted, her voice low. "Maybe she's in trouble." Ethan frowned but said nothing more. He knew Clara was stubborn when it came to helping others, especially when it came to children. He also knew that her instinct to protect, to heal, was one of the reasons he had fallen in love with her in the first place. They wandered further into the park, passing families on picnics and joggers making their rounds. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her eyes darted around, looking for the small figure of Lena. But there was no sign of her. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Clara saw her. Lena was sitting on a swing, her hands wrapped tightly around the chains, staring straight ahead. Clara's heart squeezed as she walked toward her, Ethan following closely behind, a quiet concern in his expression. "Lena," Clara called softly, crouching down beside her. "Are you okay?" Lena's eyes flickered to Clara, but she didn't speak. Her small lips trembled as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. It was a moment that broke Clara's heart, a child so young, so silent, weighed down by something too heavy for her age. Ethan stepped forward, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Hey there, little one, we're just worried about you. Okay?" Lena blinked, then slowly shook her head, her dark eyes distant. Then, to Clara's surprise, the girl took a deep breath and spoke in a hushed voice, almost as if she had to force the words out. "I don't have a mommy," Lena whispered. Clara felt her chest tighten as she heard the words. She reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from Lena's face. "I'm so sorry, Lena. Where's your daddy?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lena stared at the ground for a long moment, then finally looked up at Clara, her face twisted with emotion. But still no tears. "He's gone. He left." Clara's heart cracked. There was something so tragic in Lena's voice, as if she had accepted it, whatever had happened, as a part of her life. Something she couldn't change. It was a heavy weight for someone so small. "Do you live with someone else?" Clara asked softly. Lena nodded slowly. "Auntie, but she's not nice." Her voice broke on the last word. And for the first time, Clara noticed the faint bruise on the side of the girl's neck, barely visible beneath her hair. Clara's stomach turned. She could feel the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. This wasn't just a child who was lonely or lost. This was a child who had been hurt, abandoned, and neglected, and she had been waiting for someone to see her, to offer her the help she so desperately needed. Ethan glanced at Clara, his expression now serious. "What's going on, Lena?" he asked, his voice firm but gentle. "Where is your aunt?" Lena's eyes darted around the park, her gaze flicking nervously to the families nearby. She leaned closer to Clara, as if the words she was about to say were too dangerous for anyone else to hear. She hurts me sometimes. She yells, and makes me do bad things. But I don't want to. I don't want to anymore." Clara froze, a chill running down her spine. Her mind raced with the implications of what Lena had just said. Abuse, neglect. But it was more than just physical pain, it was emotional. Psychological. Lena's voice barely rose above a whisper as she clutched Clara's sleeve, her small body trembling. "I don't want to stay there. I want to stay with you and Mr. Ethan. Please." Clara's heart shattered at the words. This little girl, this fragile soul, was asking for help, asking for something she had never had. Safety, love, protection. Clara's mind raced as she stood up, looking around the park again. She knew they couldn't just take Lena with them without knowing what was happening at home. But in that moment, all she wanted to do was gather the girl in her arms and protect her from the world. Ethan took Clara's hand, his voice steady and resolute. "We'll help you, Lena. We'll figure this out, okay? But we need to go to the authorities. All right? It's the only way we can make sure you're safe." Lena nodded, but Clara could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't want to go back. She didn't trust the system. And who could blame her? After all she had been through, it was a miracle that she trusted anyone at all. But Clara wasn't going to let this little girl down. Not now. Not ever. "We'll make sure you're safe, Lena," Clara promised, her voice unwavering. "We'll make sure you never have to feel scared again." Lena's small hand gripped Clara's tightly. And for the first time, Clara felt the weight of responsibility in her chest. They had to fight for Lena. They had to fight for her future. And Clara would fight with everything she had. Clara couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, Lena's haunted face appeared in her mind. The bruises on her neck, her desperate plea for safety, The weight of the child's pain sat like a boulder on her chest, suffocating her, but also driving her forward. She had to act. She had to do something. Anything. To ensure Lena was safe. Ethan, on the other hand, was still processing the magnitude of what they had just learned. After they left the park, he had called the local authorities. But the process of getting a child removed from an unsafe environment was never straightforward. Even now, as Clara lay awake, he was downstairs, speaking with a social worker on the phone, trying to navigate the tangled web of red tape that often delayed action. Clara, unable to rest, stood up and quietly walked to the window. The neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting a soft glow over the empty streets. She stared out into the darkness, feeling a deep sense of helplessness. She wished she could do more for Lena, wished she could take the child into her arms and shelter her from everything that had already scarred her. A soft knock on the door broke her thoughts. Clara turned and saw Ethan standing in the doorway, looking weary but resolute. "Everything okay?" she asked, turning to face him. Ethan sighed, rubbing his eyes. "I spoke with someone at Child Services. They'll send someone over to check on Lena tomorrow morning. But it might take a few hours before anything happens. They want to be sure they have all the facts before they intervene." Clara nodded, though she could feel a knot tightening in her stomach. She hated the waiting. Every second that passed felt like an eternity when it came to Lena's safety. "Do you think she's safe at her aunt's?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan hesitated. "I don't know, but I don't think it's just physical abuse. The way Lena spoke, it sounds like her aunt might be emotionally abusive too. She's living in fear." "Clara, no child should have to live like that." Clara took a deep breath, her fists clenching at her sides. "We have to do something. We can't just sit here." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening. "I know, but right now, we need to be patient. We need to trust that the system will do its job. We're doing what we can." But Clara's mind was already racing ahead. She couldn't wait. Lena had been waiting for help for far too long. And Clara couldn't stand the thought of her going back to that house. Back to the person who had caused her so much pain. "Maybe we can visit her aunt's house," Clara said suddenly, her voice steady with determination. "See for ourselves what's really going on. If we can gather enough evidence, we can get the authorities involved immediately. It might be risky, but it's the only way we can help Lena now." Ethan frowned, clearly concerned. "Clara, that's a dangerous idea. What if it makes things worse? What if her aunt is violent or retaliates against Lena?" "I know," Clara said, her voice firm, "but if Lena stays there any longer, I'm afraid she'll lose her chance to get out. We can't let that happen." Ethan's eyes softened, but he didn't protest further. He knew Clara well enough to understand that once she made up her mind, there was no stopping her. "I'll go with you," Ethan said, stepping closer. "We'll go together. But we need to be careful. We don't know what we're walking into." Clara nodded, relieved to have his support. "We'll be careful. We just need to be sure Lena is safe." The next morning, Clara and Ethan made their way to Lena's neighborhood. The streets were quiet, the houses lined up in neat rows, each one seemingly perfect from the outside. But Clara knew better now. The appearance of normalcy could hide the darkest secrets. They found Lena's aunt's house at the edge of the block. It was a small, modest home, unremarkable to anyone passing by. But to Clara, it felt like a place of danger. She felt the weight of the decision hanging over her as she stood at the gate, staring at the house. "We should knock and see if anyone's home," Ethan suggested, his voice low. Clara nodded. "Let's do it." They approached the front door, and Clara knocked softly. There was no answer. She knocked again, a little louder this time. After a few seconds, the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged woman with disheveled hair, a cigarette dangling from her lips. She looked at them with suspicion. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, her voice thick with an accent Clara didn't recognize. "We're looking for Lena," Clara said, keeping her voice calm. "She's a little girl, about 5 years old. We met her in the park yesterday. She said she lives here." The woman narrowed her eyes, her gaze flickering with something Clara couldn't quite place. "What's it to you?" "We're concerned about her," Ethan said, stepping forward. "She seems like she might need some help." The woman laughed bitterly. She's fine. She's just fine. You don't need to worry about her. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in the woman's tone that didn't match her words. It was a tone Clara had heard before, one that used deflection to hide something more sinister. We'd like to speak to her. Clara pressed. Can we come inside? The woman hesitated for a moment, then looked over her shoulder into the dim interior of the house. Her face softened, but only just. You can come in, she said reluctantly, but don't be causing trouble. Clara exchanged a look with Ethan, then followed the woman inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The house was small and cramped, the air thick with the smell of stale smoke and something else, something darker. Lena was sitting on the couch in the living room, her head down, her arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't look up when Clara and Ethan entered, but Clara could see the way the girl's body tensed as if she were preparing for something bad to happen. Hey, Lena, Clara said gently, kneeling beside the couch. Are you okay? Lena looked up slowly, her eyes wide with fear. She opened her mouth as if to speak. But then the woman from the door stepped into the room, her eyes flashing. You've got no business here, she snapped, her voice rising. I told you she's fine. Now get out. Clara stood up, her pulse quickening. We're just trying to help. We're worried about Lena. The woman's expression twisted, her anger palpable. You don't know anything about us. Just leave us alone. Clara's heart skipped a beat, realizing just how close they were to uncovering the truth. She could feel the tension building, and she knew they had to act fast. We're not going anywhere until we know Lena's safe, Clara said, her voice firm. The woman's eyes flashed with something darker, something that made Clara's stomach turn. You don't know what you're getting into, she hissed, taking a step toward them. Clara took a step back, instinctively pulling Lena closer to her. We'll be contacting the authorities if we need to, she said, her voice steady, though every nerve in her body was screaming for them to leave. Ethan's hand brushed Clara's arm, and he gave her a subtle nod, signaling it was time to go. Slowly, carefully, they backed toward the door, their eyes on the woman. We'll be back, Clara said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. As they stepped outside, the weight of what had just happened settled over Clara. They had learned enough to know that Lena was in far more danger than they had thought. And now, with no turning back, they would fight to protect her. The drive back was filled with an eerie silence. Clara sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the city passed by in a blur. The feeling of dread had settled over her like a heavy fog, and her thoughts were consumed with Lena. There was something about the way the woman had reacted, something in her eyes, that made Clara believe they had just scratched the surface of a much darker reality. Ethan was focused on the road ahead, his jaw clenched, his grip tight on the steering wheel. He hadn't said much since they left the house, but Clara could feel the tension radiating from him. She knew that both of them were feeling the weight of what they had just witnessed. We need to go back, Clara finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was an underlying urgency to it. Ethan glanced at her, his brow furrowing. Clara, we can't. Not yet. We need to be strategic. If we push too hard, we could make things worse for Lena. Clara shook her head, her heart pounding. But she's in there, Ethan. She's trapped in that house, with no one to protect her. And if we just wait for child services to do something, I don't know how long it will take. I don't think Lena has that long. Ethan sighed deeply, his hands tightening on the wheel. I know, but we have to be careful. We can't just storm in there. We need evidence. We need to know exactly what's going on before we make a move. If we confront her aunt without the right proof, we risk pushing Lena further into harm's way. Clara was quiet for a moment, letting Ethan's words sink in. He was right, they couldn't act impulsively. But the thought of Lena suffering, alone and scared, gnawed at her insides. Every instinct in her screamed to protect the child, to shield her from the world that had already hurt her so much. What if we go back? But we try a different approach? Clara suggested. What if we talk to her again, just the two of us, and see if she'll trust us enough to tell us what's really going on? Ethan's eyes flickered to her again, and this time, there was a hint of something reluctance mixed with a glimmer of hope. I don't like it, he muttered, but maybe that's the only way. Clara nodded, feeling a sense of resolve settle over her. She couldn't sit by and do nothing. Not when Lena was counting on them. The next day, Clara and Ethan returned to the neighborhood. Their nerves taut, hearts heavy. The morning sun was bright, but it did little to ease the heaviness in the air. Clara felt like a storm was building, one that she couldn't control. No matter how hard she tried to prepare. They arrived at the house. This time walking up to the door with quiet determination. Clara's hand shook as she knocked softly. The door creaked open a few moments later, revealing the same woman from the day before. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Clara and Ethan standing there. What do you want now? The woman asked. Her tone cold. We need to talk to Lena, Clara said, her voice calm but firm. Just a few minutes, please. The woman hesitated, clearly torn, before stepping aside and muttering. Fine, but don't take too long. Clara and Ethan stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room as they passed. The house still had that oppressive feeling, a sense of unease that hung in the air like a dark cloud. Lena was sitting on the couch again, her back to them. This time, she didn't look up when they entered. Clara's heart ached at the sight of the little girl. So small, so fragile, and yet so full of silent strength. She could see the tension in Lena's shoulders, the way she clutched her knees to her chest, as if bracing for impact. Lena, Clara said softly, kneeling in front of her. We're not here to hurt you. We just want to talk. Okay? Lena looked up slowly, her large brown eyes filled with a mix of fear and uncertainty. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the words seemed to get caught in her throat. Clara could see the conflict in the child's eyes. She wanted to trust them, but something was holding her back. You don't have to be scared, Ethan added gently. We're here to help you. If you tell us what's going on, we can make sure you're safe. Lena finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I don't want to go back. Clara's breath caught in her chest. Go back where, sweetheart? Lena's lip trembled, but she didn't answer immediately. She looked toward the hallway, where the woman had disappeared moments before, and then back at Clara and Ethan. Her small hands were trembling as she wiped her face with the sleeve of her shirt. Lena, Clara said softly, taking the child's hands in her own. Whatever it is, you're not alone. We're here to help you. The little girl's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Clara thought she might collapse in front of her. But then Lena spoke, her voice breaking the silence like a fragile bird breaking free from its cage. She hurts me, Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. My aunt, she hurts me when no one's around. She says I'm bad. That I don't belong here. Clara's heart shattered. She could barely comprehend what Lena was saying, the weight of the words sinking into her soul. You don't have to stay there, Lena, Clara said, her voice shaking. We'll get you out of here. We'll make sure you're safe. But Lena shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. She'll make me go back. She'll hurt me more if I tell. Clara's mind raced, panic threatening to swallow her whole. They couldn't let Lena go back to that house, not after everything she had just told them. You're not going back there, Ethan said firmly, his voice like steel. We'll make sure of it. You're safe now, Lena. We'll get you out. Lena's small body shuddered as she let out a quiet sob, her shoulders shaking. Clara wrapped her arms around the child, holding her close. The weight of the world seemed to press down on Clara's chest as she held Lena. But she also felt a sense of fierce determination. They weren't leaving until Lena was safe. Within hours, the authorities arrived. Clara and Ethan had managed to get a social worker to respond to the situation. But they knew they needed more. They needed action. The woman was furious when the social worker arrived, her face contorted in rage. What are you doing here? She demanded, her voice high with panic. I'm here to take Lena, the social worker said calmly, stepping forward with the authority of her position. This child is in danger, and we have the right to remove her from this home. The woman's face went pale, her defiance crumbling in the face of legal authority. She's fine, she stammered. She's just a little brat. She's been causing trouble. But Lena didn't need to say another word. The social worker had already made her decision. Lena was taken into protective custody, and Clara and Ethan watched as the child was driven away in an official car. Finally safe from the torment she had endured for so long. As they watched the car disappear down the street, Clara squeezed Ethan's hand. There was still so much to be done. So many questions left unanswered. But for now, Lena was safe, and that was all that mattered. The days that followed were filled with a mix of relief and anxiety. Clara and Ethan stayed in close contact with the social worker assigned to Lena's case, making sure that the little girl was being cared for in her new foster home. They had done the right thing by intervening. But the road ahead would be long. Lena's scars, emotional and physical, were not easily erased. Ethan had been quiet since the day they took Lena away. His thoughts a mystery. Clara could see it in his eyes. The way he replayed the moment over and over, as if wondering if they had done enough. Clara felt the same weight pressing on her chest. She couldn't forget Lena's tear-streaked face. The way she had clung to them with the last shred of hope she had. It haunted her, reminding her of how fragile children were, and how quickly their innocence could be destroyed. "How's she doing?" Clara asked softly one morning as she prepared breakfast. Ethan had been up early, a habit he'd adopted after the events with Lena. He didn't seem to sleep much these days. "She's adjusting," Ethan replied, his voice low, as though he were still trying to convince himself. "The foster family seems kind. They're taking it slow with her, letting her process everything at her own pace. I don't know if she'll ever really trust anyone again." Clara set the plates down. Sitting beside him. "She will. It'll take time, but she will. You can see it in her eyes. She wants to trust. She just needs someone who can show her that not everyone is out to hurt her." Ethan looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're really something, Clara. I don't know how you do it." Clara shook her head. "It's not me. It's us. We've been doing this together from the start. You've been just as much a part of this as I have." He let out a deep sigh, his shoulders dropping as if some of the tension had lifted. I can't stop thinking about what happened to her. What she went through. How could someone do that to a child?" Clara's heart broke for him. For both of them. People do terrible things, Ethan, and it's hard to understand why. But we can't let that darkness consume us. We have to keep fighting for the good. The weight of her words hung in the air for a moment. There were times when Clara wasn't sure if she believed everything she said. Sometimes, the world seemed so broken that it felt impossible to keep fighting. But she couldn't give up now. Not after all they had done. Not after they had seen what one child's courage could do to change the course of her life. It was 2 weeks before Clara received the phone call that would change everything. She had just finished her shift at the community center and was about to leave when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it made her heart skip a beat. "Hello?" Clara answered, her voice wary. "Is this Clara Hayes?" a woman's voice asked on the other end. "I'm Maria Jensen. I'm Lena's foster mother." Clara's pulse quickened. "Yes. This is Clara. How is she? Is everything okay?" Maria's tone was warm but serious. "Lena's doing much better. We've been giving her space, letting her adjust. But there's something else we need to talk about. Something that's come up." Clara's stomach twisted. "What's going on? Is she all right?" "She's fine," Maria reassured her quickly. "But Lena," she started talking. "About her aunt. About the things that happened in that house. We think she's ready to tell her story." Clara's breath caught. This was what they had been waiting for, the moment when Lena found the strength to speak out. "To tell the truth, I need to come see her," Clara said urgently. "Can we meet? Can we do it today?" "I'll arrange it," Maria replied. "Lena's ready, but we want to make sure we approach this slowly, so she doesn't feel overwhelmed." Clara agreed, hanging up the phone with a sense of urgency in her chest. This was it. They were going to learn the truth about what had happened to Lena in that house. And maybe, just maybe, they would finally be able to give the little girl the justice she so desperately deserved. When Clara and Ethan arrived at the foster home that afternoon, Lena was sitting quietly at the kitchen table, drawing with a crayon in her hand. She looked up when they entered, her expression soft but guarded. There was a new light in her eyes, one that hadn't been there the last time Clara saw her. It was as if the walls around her heart were starting to crack. Just a little. Lena's foster mother, Maria, smiled warmly at them as they entered the living room. She's been looking forward to seeing you both. But we want to make sure this is on her terms. If she gets too upset, we stop. No pressure. Clara nodded. Of course. We're here for her. Whenever she's ready. Maria led them to the table where Lena was sitting. And Clara knelt down in front of her. Hey there, sweetie. How are you feeling? Lena looked up at Clara. Her small face serious. I'm okay, she said softly, her voice stronger than before. Ethan smiled gently at her. We're so glad to see you doing better. Lena, how's your new room? Lena's eyes lit up. It's big. I have a bed all to myself. And a lamp with stars on it. It's nice. Clara's heart ached. The simple things that should have always been hers. The things every child deserved. Had been taken from Lena for so long. That sounds wonderful, Clara said, her voice tender. And we're so happy you're safe here. You know, you've been so brave. Lena didn't speak right away. Her small hands were folded tightly in her lap. And Clara could tell she was working up the courage to say something important. Finally, Lena spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to go back to my aunt's house. I don't like her. She makes me feel scared. She hurts me. When she's mad, Lena trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. Clara reached out, gently taking her hand. Lena, sweetheart, you don't ever have to go back there again. We're going to make sure of it. Lena's sobs broke the silence. And Clara pulled her into a warm embrace, holding her tight as the child cried out all the pain she had been carrying. Ethan stood quietly beside them, his hand on Clara's shoulder. Both of them realizing that this moment, this small act of bravery, was the beginning of Lena's journey toward healing. And though the road ahead would be long, Clara knew one thing for certain, they would walk it together. Every step of the way. The weeks that followed were both healing and challenging. Lena began to open up more. But there were still moments when the past would overwhelm her. Moments when she would retreat back into herself. But with Clara and Ethan by her side, she slowly learned to trust again. Clara took time off from work to help Lena adjust to her new life. They spent hours together, baking cookies, reading stories, and talking about everything and nothing. Every smile, every small victory, felt like a triumph. But there were nights when Lena would wake up crying, whispering about shadows in the dark or voices she couldn't escape. Each time, Clara would hold her, assuring her that she was safe, that no one could hurt her anymore. Ethan, though quieter about his feelings, was equally dedicated. He had a special bond with Lena, one built on simple gestures, a shared laugh over a silly joke, a walk in the park where they both watched the sunset in peaceful silence. Ethan had always been good with kids, but with Lena, he felt something more profound. She had become a reminder of everything worth fighting for, of the resilience of the human spirit, of the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. It was on a crisp autumn afternoon when Clara received the news they had all been dreading. The investigation into Lena's aunt had led to a series of interviews and court hearings. And now, they were on the verge of bringing charges against her. It wasn't going to be an easy battle. Lena's aunt was well connected and had tried to use her influence to avoid consequences, but the evidence was mounting. Clara sat in her car, the phone pressed to her ear, her heart pounding in her chest. Are you sure? She asked, her voice trembling. She's been arrested? Yes, Clara, the voice on the other end confirmed. Lena's aunt is in custody. The charges are severe, but we believe we have enough evidence to move forward. A sense of relief washed over Clara, but it was mixed with sorrow. The victory didn't feel like one. Not with the knowledge of what Lena had endured. It was hard to feel joy when it was the pain of the past that had made this moment possible. Clara hung up the phone and sat in silence for a moment, staring out at the trees that lined the street. The light had shifted to golden hues, casting long shadows on the ground. She thought about Lena, about how far she had come. She had been through so much. And yet, here she was, alive, breathing, beginning to live again. Ethan was waiting for her when she returned home. He was standing by the kitchen counter, a cup of coffee in hand, his brow furrowed in thought. What's going on? He asked. Sensing her mood, Clara shook her head, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. Lena's aunt is in custody. She's not going to hurt her anymore. Ethan walked over and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. You did it, he murmured softly. We did it, she's free. But Clara couldn't feel the weight of victory. Not yet. Not when Lena's pain was still so fresh. So raw. I don't feel like we've won, she admitted. Not yet. The trial took place several months later. The courtroom was filled with tension as Lena's testimony was presented. She was brave, more than anyone could have imagined. She spoke clearly and confidently about the horrors she had endured. But Clara could see the shadows in her eyes as she relived it all. It was a painful experience for everyone involved. But it was necessary. Necessary for Lena's healing. Necessary for justice to be served. When the verdict came down, Clara was sitting in the courtroom with Ethan by her side. They held hands tightly, the weight of the moment settling over them like a heavy fog. The judge's gavel struck, and Lena's aunt was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. It was a moment of justice. But Clara's heart still ached. It would take time for Lena to understand what this meant, to process the finality of it all. Later, as they walked out of the courtroom, Lena took Clara's hand. It's over, right? She asked quietly, looking up at her with wide eyes. Clara knelt down to her level, brushing a lock of hair from her face. It's over, sweetheart. You're safe now. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Lena's lips trembled, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled, a small, tentative smile. But it was there. It was the beginning of something new. Months passed, and life began to feel more normal for Lena. She was adjusting to her new home, to the family that had embraced her as one of their own. Clara and Ethan continued to visit regularly, their bond with Lena growing stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, as Clara watched Lena play with other children in the park, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. It was hard to believe how far they had come, how much they had all changed. The little girl who had once been so broken was now laughing, playing, and dreaming once again. As Clara and Ethan walked back toward their car, their hands intertwined, Ethan spoke up. You know, Clara, we've been through a lot together. And I think we've made a real difference. Not just in Lena's life, but in each other's lives. Clara nodded, smiling softly. I think so too, Ethan, and I think we're just getting started. In that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the sky, Clara knew that no matter what challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. They had already changed one life, Lena's, and maybe, just maybe, they would change the world. One small act of courage and compassion at a time.